Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the virtual college fair for all Hawaii students. Thank you for joining us this morning. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. The presenters are going to try to address the questions at the end of the session. Your camera and microphones are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. This is just one of many different sessions that is happening, so be sure to check out the full schedule at strivescan.com/Hawaii. This presentation is being recorded and will be available within about a week at the same website. So now I'd like to turn the presentation over to our presenters. I'm going to welcome Teriann Matsuda and Andrea Frangi.
Thanks, Denise. Hi, everybody. My name is Andrea Frangi, and I'm the Regional Director of Admission for the George Washington University. And today, Teriann Matsuda and I are going to be talking to you about college planning for juniors, the changing landscape of college admission. As Denise mentioned, we will be taking questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to leave time at the end to tackle those. Teriann, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Teriann Matsuda. I'm the Regional Admissions Manager for Cal Poly, and actually my territory is Hawaii, and I'm based in Hawaii as well. So we're going to start talking about different options for your choices for colleges. And I wanted to first share with you to let you know that there are more than 3,000 colleges in the United States, as well as 11,000 or more than 11,000 international universities. So you have the world to choose from. So how do you choose from all of those colleges? How do you narrow it down? Here are some factors that we're going to be covering today. We're going to be talking about location, campus setting, public and private, the differences. You're going to look at academic profile. What does test optional, test blind mean now that a lot of schools are changing? Majors, what majors are offered, level of degrees, where to start, and the cost. So these are some of the factors that can help you narrow down your search. So from 14,000 colleges and universities, how do you narrow it down to a shorter list? We're going to start with location. So as you know, there are things to consider of its location. So you have those large choices, but you want to narrow it down because you're not going to obviously apply or research to 14,000 universities. So just to consider some things is the travel. How far do you want to travel from home? Do you want to stay in Hawaii? Do you want to go to either another island? Do you want to go to international or to the continent? So it just kind of depends on your choices. And if you live on Oahu, if you live on the west side, do you want to travel to town to go to college? Do you want, so those are things that you definitely want to take note of when you're looking for colleges and kind of narrowing your choices down. So those are the things, and also urban versus rural. So do you want to be someplace in a big city? Do you want someplace that's in a little small like town, area, countryside? Those are things to also consider when you're looking at different colleges. Again, you'll have a lot of options in front of you. So those are some ways to kind of start that discussion on location. Now, campus setting is another thing that students will be looking into and trying to figure out what size, what campus life, and what kind of student demographics are at the university and the population. So to give you some examples of size, because I think that's kind of important, if you see the different breakdowns on what kind of considers extremely large, large, medium, and small. So just to kind of give you an idea of what's local here and kind of put into perspective. So if you look at UH Manoa, they have like 18,000 students. So that would put them into the large category. UH Manoa is about 3,500 students. So that would put them into maybe the smaller category. If you're looking at maybe BYU, I mean, they're looking at 2,800. So that's small as well. And Hawaii CC, another one, is about 2,600. So many of our schools in Hawaii are in the small-ish, medium to large population. So just to kind of give you a sense of what the different sizes look like, there are extremely large colleges with over 30,000 students, none in Hawaii that are that large, but there are different options if you're thinking you want a huge school to go to. And campus life. So you need to find out, do all the students live on campus? Do you want all the students to live on campus? Do you want a mix? Do you want it to be a commuter? Like, do you want to see that maybe a handful of students live on campus and most students are commuting onto campus? So those are things to consider as well. Does it have athletics? Do you care? Do you want to play? Do you want to watch? I don't care if they have any sports. I'm not going to participate in anything. So those are some other options. Also, what kind of clubs and organizations you want to get involved with? Do they have that what you're interested in? Another organization is sorority and fraternities. You're going to find that some schools, most of the students are in sororities and fraternities. You'll find out that some schools, they don't have sororities and fraternities, and then everywhere in between. Do you care about that? Do they offer that? But they also offer a lot of options for other clubs and organizations if you decide you don't want to participate in that. And the diversity on campus. Do you want to meet students who are different from you or very similar from you? Those are things that you want to consider when you're looking and narrowing down your selection. And all of these, I mean, this is not in a silo, of course. There's other things that we're going to be talking about more to kind of add on to help you narrow your choices down. So where to start and what are the different types of degrees and where you're going to start? So some of those things you'll find, so some schools are considered trade or technical schools, and they're usually short, like 8 months to 2-year programs. And some of those, and they're going to kind of get you ready to do a specific type of job. Examples would be maybe electrician, medical assistants, cosmetology. So there are some specific schools that kind of just make you, start you in the profession right away. And that's all the courses you're going to be taking, or most of the courses. We're finding that most of those courses from trade or technical schools are not transferable. So if you're thinking you're going to start there, but then maybe transfer to a 4-year university, you definitely want to make sure that if you do that, that the courses you've taken will possibly transfer. Now, moving on to community college, which we do have a lot of options here in Hawaii for community college. You'll find that it's more open enrollment. Some students who want to do that transfer to 4-year colleges decide they want to start in community college for a few reasons, because it's closer to home, or because of the cost factor, or because they're just thinking that I just want that to just start to kind of feel like what college is like before they dive into the 4-year program. However, you can also get an associate degree and start working right away with an associate, depending on the degree type and the topic that you're going to be focusing on. And then there's a 4-year university, which is a lot what we're talking about today. And typically it's a 4-year experience. And you'll find that many colleges offer different degrees. So some will offer bachelor's, master's, PhD, medical, MDs, and so forth. And each school will offer a different thing. You'll find more research opportunities within the university setting, university college setting, more comprehensive, and a lot of interdisciplinary. So that means you're going to be taking courses not only from your major or your subject that you're studying, but also from other areas as well. So kind of building that more well-roundedness within you. Thanks, Andrea.
Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between public and private schools. So when you're crafting your list, you might want to be thinking a little bit about putting examples of each on that list for a well-balanced look at various different colleges. So one thing to think about with public and private schools, and you've got examples of one of each with Terry Ann and myself. So Terry Ann at Cal Poly is working at a public institution, and me at George Washington University is working at a private school. With tuition, often with public institutions, there's some government subsidies that are taking place there. Private institutions typically are not receiving government funding in order to run as an institution. They're relying more heavily on alumni donations, tuition, investments, and things of that nature. Sometimes you'll see when you're comparing just kind of the total cost of attendance that many public institutions will have a smaller price tag than a private institution would have. However, many private institutions work really hard to be affordable options through merit scholarship and financial aid awards. So I wouldn't discount a private school just based on that initial price tag, which can be intimidating. But a good question to always ask is, what do your scholarships look like? What kind of financial aid packages do you offer? Public institutions also, if you're looking at state schools, will likely have a different cost of attendance for somebody who is in-state, an in-state resident, as opposed to somebody who's coming from out of state. If I remember correctly, there's going to be a presentation on financial aid, which will likely tackle WUI, which we'll mention again. We are not necessarily the experts in financial aid, so we would recommend that you hear from them. Another thing that you can see as a difference between public and private institutions sometimes is the size. And so many public institutions, especially like a University of Washington or a school that is in the University of California system, like they're going to be generally in that large category that Terry Ann was talking about. Whereas many of the private schools in this country trend more towards medium or smaller size schools. And she gave a couple really great examples, with BYU having, I think it was about 2,800 students, as opposed to UH Manoa, which is going to be in that large category. Class size and demographics. A lot of state schools are mandated by the government to have a certain number of students from that local state. So they might have been founded with the intention of educating the taxpayers in that state, which is often why if you're coming from out of state, you might be paying a little bit more money. And so in those cases, a lot of times you're going to find students from that state are represented in a higher population percentage than out-of-state students might be. Not always the case, but at some of the larger state schools, definitely a possibility. Many private schools that are smaller might be very regional, and so might be pulling students from the surrounding states, but not from all over the country. Although there are a lot of private schools out there that have a national reach, and so have students from all 50 states. They might have a robust international student population as well. And then something else that you might want to be thinking about are opportunities and resources. At large institutions, there can often be a lot more offices, opportunities, a larger number of majors to choose from, with opportunities to do like deep dives into particular areas of creative writing or English that you might not necessarily find at a smaller school. So if there's a really specific area of academic focus that you have that's not as broad as like psychology or criminal justice, sometimes looking at those larger institutions where they're able to get very granular because they have a larger percentage of students can be a great way to go. Although at smaller schools, it's very often that you're going to get a little bit more of that handheld experience where they're going to be able to really walk with their students through the process, walk with their students through their 4-year experience at the institution. You might find smaller class sizes at medium and smaller private institutions than you would at some of the larger state schools. So thinking about like how you learn and what classroom experience you want from your 4 years can also help you sort of figure out if a public or private institution might be the right fit for you. Next slide, please. Great, so we're going to talk about academic profile for a minute, and I'm going to let this sit up here so that you can take a little look at that flyer for a minute. I think that in this country, we have done a really good job of talking about 7 to 10 schools on a pretty regular basis. And you will see some of their names listed here. They are fine institutions. They are amazing institutions. That's why we get to hear about them a lot. But they're not the right academic fit for everyone. And so I think it's really important when you're looking at building the list of schools that you are considering applying to, that you have really great balance there that also includes schools that are going to be a good academic fit for you. It's great to have a reach school or two, and a reach school is going to be a school that's maybe like based on your academic profile, something that might be a little, that your GPA and test scores, if you have them, might be like a little bit beyond. You might be a little bit below their average. But I think it's really important to have schools that are going to be great academic fits, particularly if you've been pushing really hard for the last 2 to 3 years in high school to get the grades that you're getting, which hopefully you're working hard and challenging yourself appropriately, but not pushing yourself so hard that you are feeling unhealthy or not able to sleep or stressed out. And if you are, then like thinking about, are you able to sustain that for 4 years in college is also really important. You want to make sure that you're picking a school that is going to allow you to work at your optimum, but also not going to create an environment where you are constantly concerned about being able to achieve at the level at which you have become accustomed. You will see here that at Harvard, they are rejecting 1 out of 4 students with perfect SAT scores. It is going to take more than perfect SAT scores and a 4.0 GPA to get into Harvard. And that can be a really harsh reality when that's a school that we talk about a lot in this country. But I do think that like identifying schools that are going to be a strong academic fit for you is really important. And considering how you learn. So on the last slide, we were talking about class size. Like, do you do better when you're being lectured at? Do you like to be an active participant in the classroom? Do you want to do small group work with 3 or 4 other students? How do you learn best? Helping to identify that and then working with your college counselor or speaking with the adults in your life who might be walking with you on this journey can really help you figure out what kinds of schools might be a great fit for you. Next slide, please. So test optional and test blind. Cal Poly is a great example of a school that has gone test blind for 2021. GW is an example of a school that has been test optional since 2015. There are many universities in this country that have been test optional prior to this fall and have been reading applications without testing. If you are concerned about your access to an SAT or ACT test because testing centers have been closed, perhaps your high school isn't able to offer it for you, or maybe you took the test and weren't super happy about your scores or felt like maybe they're not the most adequate representation of who you are as an academic. Test optional or test blind schools are plentiful right now, and you might want to be adding them to your list. So test optional is going to be you as an applicant deciding whether or not you want to submit your testing and have it be considered as part of your application package. If you submit it and indicate on the application that you want it to be looked at, it will be considered. As opposed to test blind, where whether you submit scores or not, the person reading your application is typically never going to see your tests and they will not be factored into your admission decision. I do think that sometimes there is a concern around applying test optional or test blind, and I hear often from students like, if I don't submit test scores, but another student does, aren't you just going to pick the student who submits test scores? And I think it's a great question, but it also relies on a falsehood. The majority of universities out there don't pit students against each other. So we're not looking at 2 applications and saying, well, one of these looks better than the other, so I'm going to accept them. That's just not the way it works. We typically are reviewing an applicant based on their merits and the information that they have provided to us, and not comparing them to other applicants. And so if a student opts not to submit testing at a test optional institution, we're certainly not going to be holding that against them. Next slide, please. Okay, so thinking a little bit about like your academic areas of interest and your major is really important. And if you're undecided, super fine. There are amazing universities out there that are public and private that are going to help you walk through that discernment process around finding the right academic path for you. That having been said, if you're somebody who has particular academic areas of interest, whether that's in the STEM, in the arts, in the performing or visual arts, in business, education, if you're looking for an ag culture path, or if you're looking for pre-med or pre-law, like identifying those now so that you can be sure to be asking admissions counselors at college fairs, there's one later today, or at virtual visits at your high school, or even in person when we get back to that, can be really important. You don't want to be spending a lot of time falling in love with a school that isn't going to have the theater program of your dreams. So having the opportunity to think about like what your academic areas of interest are, as well as your academic strengths, can really help you build your complete list of schools that you're going to be applying for. And I think that this really plays to the component of the application process and like building your school list that really is around self-discovery. And I think that that's not something that we talk about enough in the journey to applying to college, but this is very much one of the first times in your life that you're probably going to be asked to be able to identify likes, passions, dislikes, strengths, weaknesses, things of that nature. And as somebody who's 16, 17, 18, that can be a really hard, like personal conversation to have. But that's why starting now as a sophomore, junior, or even, you know, now towards the beginning of your senior year can really allow you that time to do some self-reflection and start thinking about what you're really looking for first from a school. Next slide, please. Okay, so cost. I'm talking a little bit about what things cost and what you're going to be seeing. Schools will often talk about their direct costs and indirect costs, or published price versus actual costs. So direct costs are going to be things like tuition, fees, which may include like lab fees, graduation fees, things of that nature, your room. So if the university requires that you live on campus, there's going to be a cost of living, or basically like the equivalent of rent included in that. Board, which is just an old school way of saying food, because we want you to be able to eat. Maybe a parking permit. So these are things that have like very tangible examples of what you're paying for. Tuition, generally the largest one in that bunch. Indirect costs can be things like books, your travel expenses, off-campus dining. So those are things where, like, depending on what your major is, depending on what classes you're taking, the cost of your books for that quarter or semester can totally vary. Travel expenses definitely can be significant if you're looking at going to the East Coast, if you're looking at going internationally, even if you're looking at going to the West Coast of the US to go to school. So thinking about what your travel costs are going to be and making sure that you're considering that when you're looking at finding the right financial fit for you and your family. All universities are required to have a net price calculator on their website at this point. They are not all required to have it be super easy to find. So Google is going to be your friend. Typing in the name of the institution that you're looking for and net price calculator can generally get you there pretty quick. Hot tip, many university website search engines, not the most effective. So utilizing Google is what I always do when I'm looking for a particular page at GWU. I would recommend that you do the same. And by the way, this was not brought to you by Google, but highly recommend. So net price calculators are really sort of garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not putting accurate information into the net price calculator, the estimated cost that it's going to spit out, or the estimated financial aid package or scholarship that you might receive, is going to be highly inaccurate. Take the time to do a thorough and accurate job on the net price calculator, and you're going to get a little bit more accurate information. I will say net price calculators are an estimate, and they are not a negotiation tactic. So if you come to me with a printout of what the net price calculator told you GW might cost for you and your family, and you'd like to dispute your financial aid package, the net price calculator is just an estimate and not necessarily a jumping off point for a negotiation. Also, most institutions probably not going to want to negotiate with you about their financial aid package unless there are extenuating circumstances. So financial aid is typically going to be based on FAFSA, possibly a CSS profile, and is going to include grants, which are gift aid, federal loans, or even private loans. And again, there's going to be a financial aid workshop following this one. We'll give you the information on the bottom of this slide so that you can attend that later and get all the ins and outs of financial aid. And then scholarships are often going to be something that you're going to want as much of as you can possibly get, because you don't have to pay it back, just like a grant. So it might be merit-based, so based on how you're doing academically, how you've done in your education up to that point. Some of them can be super competitive. So making sure that you're meeting deadlines, both for financial aid applications and also the admission application. Some scholarships might be academic. You might also be applying for scholarships that aren't from Cal Poly or GW, but are from the Firefighters Association or the dance group that you're a part of. So know that you can bring external scholarships to universities as well. And then WUI, which is the Western Undergraduate Exchange, is something that some of the public institutions in the West accept, and essentially that allows a student from Hawaii or one of the Western states to attend a state school at a reduced out-of-state cost. So you're not going to be paying state resident tuition, but it won't be as high as the typical out-of-state tuition is. Next slide, please. Okay, so demonstrated interest. Something that we don't always talk about in this profession, and I think it's really important to acknowledge exists. So many institutions will ask if you'd like to be on their mailing list, or when you go to a virtual high school visit or even an in-person high school visit when a college is coming to your school, they may ask you to fill out a form to be on their email distribution list. That's the first way that you can demonstrate interest, is get on the email list. Don't sign up for email lists for like 400 schools. You will never check that email box again because you will hate it. But if there are schools out there that you're interested in, letting them know by being on their distribution list can be a great thing to do. Also, many schools might require or offer interviews, a chance for you to meet with your admissions counselor or the person who could possibly be doing the visit at your high school or even reading your application. Establishing a relationship with that person can be really beneficial if you've got questions that aren't easily Googleable, but also can help when they're reading the application because they might have gotten to know you a little bit. There are opportunities to do formal interviews, also individual meetings where a school like GW doesn't offer admissions interviews, but I'm your admissions counselor. So if you have questions about GW, I'm always happy to answer them. I'm not going to be asking you what was your favorite class and why? Tell me everything. But if you have questions about DC, GW, the application process, that's why I'm here. Another thing that you can do if you're on a distribution list for a school that you really like is be sure that you're interacting with those emails. So clicking to open it, if there are hyperlinks in there or a video, watching that video. Universities have customer management tools that allow us to see if a student is interacting with an email or not. None of this is going to make or break your admission application if you're not a good academic fit for that institution. But at competitive institutions where they get more applications than they have space, something like demonstrated interest can help a reader and help the institution understand that you've been interacting with the school for over 2 years or for over 2 months or never. And that can help them understand maybe how serious you are about that application. All right, next slide.
So building your list. So Andrea offered you a lot of wealth of information as things to consider when you're looking for different schools. So again, we're going to start off with that 11,000, 14,000 plus schools out there for you to choose from. Now, of course, you're not going to choose them all. So how do you kind of narrow down your choices? Well, based on the factors that we kind of presented to you, that's one way of narrowing your choice. So think of a funnel. So you're starting on the top and then you're going to narrow it down. So as juniors, this is a great time to kind of narrow it down and to about maybe 50 schools that maybe are, maybe likely I would go deeper dive into them. And then from there, once you're starting to go into your senior year, you're probably going to try to narrow it down to about 6 to 8 that you will actually apply to. So that's the rough average. It's not the end all be all number, but you're not going to be applying to 50 schools, and it's better if you apply to more than one or two. So and so like 6 to 8 to 9 is a good number to kind of shoot for. Some of these things about how it's going to help you is the college fair that's going to happen right after, like later on this afternoon, to check out the schools that you might be interested in, learn a little bit more. You actually might hear from schools that you've never thought about, and you're like, oh, actually, this is going to be a really great fit for me. I've never heard of it before, but it kind of fills some of those boxes that I'm looking at: the size, the location, the academic fit. All of those things might, you might kind of spark an interest in you. So definitely attend the college fair at the end this afternoon. Now, actually, colleges now are doing all virtual visits to many of the high schools. So if your high school is offering a virtual visit from a school that you might be interested in, or that you're like, I wonder what this school is all about, maybe you do a pre-Google search on it and say like, oh, that's interesting, I want to learn more. And let me tell you about demonstrated interest. Not all schools use demonstrated interest, however, but if you attend that high school visit virtual session, that rep that's presenting is probably going to be your admissions representative. So you definitely want to build those connections as well. Now, all the different colleges and universities out there probably at this point have virtual information sessions on their campus or on their website that you can join, or virtual campus tours, virtual sessions that you can actually link up with different people on that campus. So if you go to the different college websites, you'll see probably a virtual tour, virtual meets, virtual sessions of some sort. And that's another great way to connect with the school. Sometimes those schools aren't visiting your high school. Sometimes they're not going to be at the college fair. So how do you get in touch with them? That's one of the great ways to kind of connect with them. And after COVID, let me tell you, a lot of these colleges will still have those virtual events on their websites that you can join throughout the year. So don't feel like, oh, this is my only chance. It's not going to be your only chance, because even afterwards, many colleges are going to still keep on doing that. The other thing is, and another thing about demonstrated interest and getting on to those virtual tours and all of those, like right now, can you really travel to the mainland and then come back home? Not so much right now. So it's a great way to show demonstrated interest that you are interested and you want to see what the campus looks like, but you're unable to do so. And many of the colleges, especially, throughout the continent, you'll find out that they understand that from Hawaii, taking that trip to their campus before, admissions, before applications is going to be a challenge. And so they understand that if you're trying to do everything else to try to get to know the school better, and they use demonstrated interest in their application process, they'll be able to see that you're actually you're really serious about their school. Many colleges have YouTube channels or on social media, so you can check those out. You'll find a wealth of knowledge. Many of their current students are doing videos as well, so you can actually hear from current students, not just from the admissions rep who love the schools that we represent, but yet we're not probably taking those classes and being on campus right now. So get advice from your high school counselors, because they're the ones who have the direct contact as well. Go to the college website. If you're not sure who your Hawaii representative is, you can definitely go on and find many of the admissions people on that website. If no one is indicated as your specific Hawaii representative, you can always reach out to the main admissions office and they'll be able to kind of help you and direct you to the right person. Next steps is take the ACT, SAT if you can. And if your family decides that you want to do that in this fall, you can do that. Don't feel like you have to, as many schools are now test optional, test blind. But also many public schools in the spring usually offer the ACT during school time. Ask your counselor, ask your teachers if they're going to still be doing that this year. Each high school might be doing it a little bit different. Attend the college visit fairs in your high school, and then you prepare for the application process. You're going to find out, like maybe in the spring, once you kind of narrow down your search a little bit more and you get a few, kind of get a smaller, find out maybe what their essay questions are, if they're going to need a transcript, how to, apply, just to kind of prepare for those types of things. And then of course, this afternoon, the college fair, 3 to 3:45, over 90 colleges and universities will be there. And so we're hoping that you can join and you can learn more about different colleges.
Great. So I think this can be a super overwhelming time of year. I think that this process can also be pretty overwhelming. You're trying to manage junior year, and then as you're moving into senior year, you're going to be overwhelmed, I'm sure, academically, but also trying to manage applying to schools, figuring out where you're applying, all of those things. And hopefully it'll be in person by then too. So find balance. And there are a number of different ways that I want you to think about balance. So first and foremost, having a balanced list of schools that you're applying to. So have a couple of reach schools in there. So schools that maybe, you know, the adults in your life have been like, I've heard that this is a really good school. And you're like, yeah, it's a really good school and it's super hard to get into. I mean, you could put one or two of those on your list, but also you want to make sure that you've got some, you know, likelies on your list where you are a solid applicant. You are well within the middle 50% that is published on the school's website for GPA, SAT, and ACT scores. And a middle 50% basically means that 25% of students that the school accepted had below the published number, and 25% of students that they admitted had above that published number. Or they might use an average. So they might say, hey, our average GPA is a 3.67, unweighted, or weighted, they'll let you know. So, and then you might want to have a couple of safety schools. And so a safety school, particularly if you are looking at schools almost exclusively on the mainland, might be a school in Hawaii for you, just in case you end up needing to stay close to home. A safety school can also be a school that, like, 100% if you apply, you are going to be admitted to it. You are well within the academic profile. And that can be really good too, because you never know what's going to happen if you're somebody who maybe gets a little bit sick, or there is an accident and you're not able to complete your senior year the way that you had hoped. A safety school can really be a great option for students as well. So having a well-balanced list means having maybe a reach or two, having the bulk of your 6 to 8 schools that you're applying to be in that likely category, and then having some definites on there as well, or some safety schools. It's also really important to manage you and your community's expectations. And I think a really good way to do that is by being pretty aware of utilizing the school's websites, the university and colleges that you're looking at, finding out what those middle 50% or average GPA and test scores are. And also if you're at a high school that has Naviance or uses any of the tools that have like a scattergram, where you can see the history for the last few years of students from your high school who've applied to the universities that you're looking at, you can see like what kind of GPA they had, whether or not they were accepted, what range their test scores fell in. And so you can have a good idea if students from your high school that have similar academic profiles to you have been successful in their applications to those institutions. Get organized, get on top of this process as soon as you possibly can. And that advice is coming from one of the world's biggest procrastinators. So do as I say, not as I typically do, but being organized is really important. You don't want to miss out on being considered for merit scholarship because you got your application in a day late. Like, what a bummer that would be. So make sure that you're managing the timelines, you're managing application deadlines, you're getting FAFSA or CSS profile information in on time if you want to be considered for need-based aid. Don't leave money on the table, don't leave opportunities on the table because you missed a deadline. Also, don't overextend yourself. You need to be thinking about challenging yourself appropriately within the context of the school that you attend, your extracurricular activities, and your family responsibilities. Don't overdo things. The last thing that we as an institution want is to be receiving a student who's been pushing so hard that by the time they get to our school, they just fall apart. We want you to come to us as well-balanced and safe and sane as you possibly can. And this can be an intimidating process, so try not to overextend yourself. Also, don't let college talk take over your life. If every dinner meal in your home is being overrun with talk of college and universities, stop. Set aside a specific time once a week for an hour, hour and a half, where you're going to update the adults in your life that have a vested interest in this on where you are with your applications, how things are going with signing up for testing. any need that you might have for a credit card in order to pay for an application fee, or where you are with requesting fee waivers. I think it's really important that families get through this process intact and happy, and not allowing the college process to take over your life is really important. For one thing, and this is to the adults in the room, your student is going to be hearing about college from all the adults in their life, right? The neighbor is going to start asking, where are you going to college? What are you doing next year? And so the more that they get that also at home, just the more resentment is going to grow, and the more that they're not going to want to talk about college, period. So you want your student, if they go away to college, to want to come home for breaks. So make sure that you're, spending the next year and a half building strong relationships with the team in your life. And students, be sure to advocate for yourself with the adults in your life and let them know, it is not time right now for me to be talking about college. Let's table that until Saturday morning when we've set aside the hour and a half for me to update you. Thank you. How mature that will sound. Also, be mindful of your information sources. The number of times that I get an email or a phone call that says, they said that blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, cool. So tell me who they were. And they're like, so it was a friend of my cousin's mom. And I'm like, okay. And do they work for my institution? Because I'm unclear how reliable they are as a resource. So think about where you're getting your information from. If you're getting information that seems like it might be a little out of left field, we've got some pretty great fact-checking sources at our fingertips, whether that's your phone and looking at the school's website, or picking up the actual phone and calling somebody in that admissions office. We're here to help you debunk any of that fake news that might be out there about our schools, and we want you to have accurate information as much as possible. Next slide, please. Okay. Lastly, you can do this. We have faith in you. You are not alone. There are going to be people in your life here to support you through this process, your college counselors at your high school, your teachers, family, friends, and then folks like Terry Ann and myself who work on the college side. We are not here to be gatekeepers. We are here to work with you through this process, to be resources for you. We want you to find success. We want you to be able to determine if our school is a good fit for you or not. And so please feel free to utilize us as much as you possibly can. Great. We're going to talk a little bit just for a couple moments about our individual schools, and then we're going to take time to tackle the few questions that we received. So again, my name is Andrea Frangi, and I'm the Regional Director of Admission for the George Washington University. I work with students from Hawaii. I've been at GW for 3 years. I've been in this profession for over 20. Have worked with students from the Pacific Northwest and Hawaii for the majority of my professional career. So typically I'm going to be the person who's reading your application if you apply to GW, and likely I know your school pretty well. GW was founded in 1821 by an act of Congress to educate leaders of this country. Leadership in this country has changed a lot in the last 200 years. We're educating a lot more women than we did 200 years ago, and we're educating a much more diverse student population than we did 200 years ago as well, and we are delighted about that. What I do want to tell you really quick, we are located in the heart of our nation's capital, 4 blocks away from the White House, across the street from the State Department. We are a private institution. We are going to require that students live on campus for 3 years, so you'll have guaranteed on-campus housing through your junior year. If you have questions, my contact information's up there. Feel free to let me know. Terry Ann?
Hi, I'm Terry Ann Matsuda. I'm the Regional Admissions Manager for Hawaii. I'm actually based on Oahu, so when you're looking at time differences to contact me, don't worry about it. We're on the same time zone. Cal Poly is located in San Luis Obispo, halfway between LA and San Francisco, so it's accessible. One of the great things about the school is a learn by doing, where you get hands-on experience right from your very first day of class. You actually jump into your major right away, and we accept students into their majors starting when they apply. So it's a great opportunity for you to get involved. We have Division I sports, and we have a lot of different opportunities for students to take advantage of where they're in Cal Poly, when they're at Cal Poly. I'm gonna next slide show you what's coming up, the virtual college fair coming up 11:30, there's some more sessions you can definitely join. And from 1 to 3:45, there is the college fair. If you haven't registered for any of those events, the website is right there. We're going to start taking some questions. We're going to look at the Q&A right now and see what questions we can answer.
Yeah, so the first question, the person's asking, how do we know if a school takes demonstrated interest into consideration or not? Sometimes that will be on the admissions website, but not always. It is completely valid for you to be asking the admissions counselor or the admissions office if they take demonstrated interest into consideration.
And then the next question is it likely that schools will be test optional or test blind again next year? Well, each school will have their own requirements, so definitely check back with them. I'm going to tell you for Cal Poly and the California State University system, we are in the process of deciding on making a decision on what's going to happen for fall 2022. Even though we are test blind for fall 2021, we're still in a discussion about fall 2022, and we will be updating everyone shortly, hopefully by the end of the year, if not early next year.
And then for those of us who've been test optional prior to COVID, that is not going to be changing. We will remain test optional. And there are many schools out there that have been test optional for 50 years or less. Okay, and then am I allowed to join the college fair? Yes, there is still time. And then do colleges typically look at extracurricular interests that you do in high school? And then somebody else asked about like community service, things along those lines. There is space on the common application for you to be able to address extracurricular activities. Many universities that also have their own applications will have space for you to be able to share what you do outside of the classroom as well.
And then when in the application process, does one contact admissions counselor? Actually, you can contact admissions counselors now as juniors anytime before you even submit the application. That is because you want to make sure all your questions are answered before you submit your application, and you definitely want to double check to make sure you're doing your application correctly. So you can actually reach out today, starting today.
And then somebody asked, a couple people are asking about COVID and how that has changed things. There are schools out there that are fully in person. There are schools out there that are doing hybrid learning. So some students might be on campus going to class, some students might be learning remotely. And there are other schools like GW, which are 100% virtual. And we just announced that we will be online for spring semester as well. You will need to contact universities individually to see what they have done. Many of them will have it on their website as well. And then Terry Ann, somebody's asking how COVID has impacted your approach to the admission decision process.
So for us specifically, we are just, the only difference is we are not going to be used test scores to make a decision on your application. And so that's the only thing is different for us. I know that in the past, other schools our students have asked about students who have deferred and how would that affect. Actually, for us specifically, not a lot of our students have deferred, so the spaces are still going to be available.
And for us, there hasn't really been any changes in deadlines. We were test optional already. While we did have quite a few students defer, we don't anticipate that that's going to have a negative impact on the class that's applying for fall 2021. Denise, I know that we're at time and you might need to cut us off, but we still have a few more questions. Are we doing okay?
We're good. Okay, so I'm going to go until Denise tells us otherwise. So what are the best places to apply for scholarships?
Sorry, I think we're going to have to get off because the next session is going to be starting. Okay. So let's see. Oh, is this what you guys are seeing right now? Or here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you for joining us, everyone. There's going to be a quick survey once we get off. Be sure that you guys can sign up for more sessions at that strivescan.com/Hawaii, and then the recordings will be available. So we're going to, I think we're going to try to answer those questions and have them available for students. I know we couldn't get to all of the questions. All right, so thank you for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
okay.
Wait, Andrea jumped out. Okay.
Okay.
Wait, is it?
I'm gonna end it.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Goodbye.